Welcome to our Going Green podcast, and today we're going to look at something that sounds a bit horrible. It's the environmental, social, and corporate governance. It used to be called socially responsible investing, but now it's called ESG for short. And this week in our Going Green blog, we carried a report about one of these major companies. We looked at Aviva Investors, and they were sending out a message to lots of different companies who they want to invest with, saying basically, well, if you don't sort of make yourself fairly carbon neutral or even carbon positive and look after human rights and various other bits and pieces, we're not going to invest in you.
Yeah.
Last year they did the same thing, and it actually had an effect. And some sort of was about 480 companies.
Something quite like that.
Yeah.
They gave notice to
Improved.
1,500 companies this time, as in they said they are put these companies on notice, and it is willing to seek their removal from their fund or in the investment block if they don't show enough urgency in tackling some of these issues. And that's fair enough.
Well, yeah, if we look at, I've got some money, I want to invest it. Do I want to invest it in a company like an oil company? I'm not going to mention any particular by name, but they're not big in sort of looking after the environment. Perhaps I want to do it in an energy company that's burning coal. Well, I'm not going to do that. I prefer to invest in a green company that's going to be sort of leading the way, the future. And I feel a lot better if I can invest in a company like that.
Yes, the idea essentially is, of course, as a consumer, you buy your power and you buy green power, as in, which is fair enough. That's cool and everything. But it's now sort of asset managers or people who got these large sums of monies are basically getting the sort of, the climate change is a thing, and they're sort of going, well, what should I do? I've got, this money. I could do something with it. I could help, put into charity and help these things. But that's not really what asset managers do. They like to find ways of putting money in to get more money out.
Yeah, they're in the process of trying to make money, but unfortunately their clients are saying things like, yeah, but I only want to invest in green companies, which is now affecting these big companies because they've got to find people to invest, or companies to invest in, who are environmentally sound, who have got good social sort of...
I wouldn't say credit, but it's that sort of idea that they actually do positive change.
And they're socially responsible.
That's it, socially responsible. So, it's one of those things where you'll find out that all these things are taking place. And an outcome of all the COPs is that this message of being people environmentally friendly, or people want to be environmentally friendly, is coming through. And so lots of asset firms and lots of financial companies and institutes and banks and things have been developing, I won't say software, but toolkits to provide investors and investment asset managers with data and facts and information around whether or not a company is being green and clean, and how the sort of risk, which is what relates to this lovely ESG, the economic, social, governance, basically score.
Yeah, so this started with the Paris Agreement Capital Transition Assessment, PACTA. I had to look it up. And that was a free, open source tool which measured the portfolios of lots of different companies along their Paris Accord agreements, their various climate scenarios. Were they doing what the Paris Accord wanted them to do?
Yeah. So this thing measured, I say measured, it was basically a score associated with sort of, and it came out in 2018,
Something like that. Yeah.
Anyway, and they looked at sort of, I don't know, 1,000 companies just to give a baseline score of what would come out, and it found out that about 600 companies, investment for 600 groups were negative in their alignment to the Paris Accords. Now, this score, which was basically from minus 100, which was not in favour of Paris, to plus 100, which was over target, with 0 being neutral, means on target / making a difference, but being neutral rather than actually being climate positive. So the idea is if you go from negative to 0, that's actually a good thing, and if you go from 0 to 100 plus, that's even better. So it gives basically a score. So these 600 companies or investment firms, or whatever you want to call them, scored minus 90 on this scoreboard. So they were scored massively low.
So they were interested in climate performance. They weren't really being socially responsible. And it's also a few other things. This is where the governance bit comes in, that they've also do sort of, basically they have good employee salary, and they look after their people. They're not sort of, I don't want to use the word slavery, because a lot of companies don't do that, but they still treat their
it's the idea
people
of the minimum
badly.
wage. Anyway.
Yeah, minimum wage and all the other bits.
Anyway, so this score. So lots of scores were done, and there was only approximately something like 150, companies that actually were positive, and they were positive by something silly like 8, or and they weren't massively. Anyway, so come to COP26, this framework is done again, because obviously with the COP26 goal was to sort of, it was to keep Paris alive, or keep 1.5 alive, and so they reviewed all the same 1,000 companies and found that the number of companies went from negative to neutral was from I'll rephrase what I've just said. The companies that found still being negative went from 600 down to only about 50. It's 58, sort of that sort of number. And the number of companies now in the neutral part of the essentially moved from negative to 0, were actually sort of nearing 800 companies. And that those who were doing climate positive, from 0 to 100, they increased from the 60 to probably sort of nearer 100 to 150. They sort of increased. So the top section growed big, whereas the middle section went expanded hugely, with the bottom minimizing. So essentially, all the companies at the bottom early actually had done positive change to go to neutral.
So you're basically saying a lot of companies just tried to improve.
Yeah.
And we could see that of those 1,000 companies, probably a good deal of them now, 900 or so, are performing a lot better than they were
5 years ago.
5 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. And you can see this, because let's take a good big company known as McDonald's.
Yep.
Right. In 2015, they produced 1.5 million tons of CO2 emission, and they were scored on a separate index, because this is how they were scored 49.3%, or 49.3. Okay. They were then remeasured or relooked at in 2019, and they found that they managed to cut their CO2 emissions by half. They managed to cut it down to 0.6 million tons of CO2 emissions.
Which is really quite good.
Which is good. That's a fantastic sort of thing to say and achieve. But it's one of those things where that's happened. So it's time to say, so the score was increased to 53.2%, or 2. I can't.
But it's a different scale.
It's a different scale. So yeah. And so by driving their CO2 emissions, that's why they managed to get this, this increase in their score, as in their being climate positive. So that's what we're talking about. It's not just sort of, they didn't have to change their policy around their CO2 emissions or their thing, but they actively did so because, it made business sense to them. But additionally, it made sense environmentally as well.
So we're looking at companies, really, a lot of them improving. And it's not just those major companies that these investment firms do this with. There are lots of other companies also following this trend, because it's good to be seen to be carbon neutral, or better still, carbon positive. And my company here, we worked out that we're more or less carbon neutral here, but we want to go carbon positive. And we do some carbon positive bits and pieces. We export our green electricity that we generate to the national grid, but we don't do enough. And what we'd like to do is try and improve all this. If you'd like to invest, of course, let me know. But on a more serious note, we're trying to do something. We're a small little company. We're trying to do something. But a lot of other companies we talk to are now, when they buy something, they're going, are you a green company? Our policy is now to buy from a green company.
Yeah, but this is where helping through, let's say all these, you hear about the sort of Rainforest Alliance, let's say if you buy only from places that are certified by the Rainforest Alliance, see, that's actually making a big difference as opposed to buying something cheaper.
But it's going to put all the companies that aren't out of business in theory, or they have to change.
Yes, this is the one that sings, is by doing this, by not forcing change, but realizing that change has to happen. And instead of being, I don't like change, actually actively working on making a change, and you're finding that your entire industry is actually changing, which is actually benefiting the climate in itself. The whole things where a whole industry only buys, let's say the coffee industry only buys coffee that's been sourced ethically, or I can't remember what the ticket is. I think that is actually the Rainforest Alliance, but that's a different. But if all the coffee people grow, suddenly you now can't get coffee that isn't climate friendly, if that makes any sense. Which means not only are consumers being good and buying only ethically sourced coffee, but the big bulk purchasers and investors are also doing this ethically, and that eventually makes all coffee ethically sourced and ethically grown, which actually helps everybody out. So it's one of those things where you'll see these things moving, but it's more because we're all going this way, and people with the money are going this way, forcing the little people. I'm not saying little, I'm talking, million size goes versus a trillion size company. You can see the smallness. If the trillion company is forcing the million company to move, then suddenly everybody has to move. Which is fantastic for climate.
Yeah, we're seeing companies making a difference. We carried another report this week about Shell that were saying, look, we're doing all this great carbon capture. And then the report said, you're doing this carbon capture on this, but you're not doing it on the rest. And then they're looking a little bit embarrassed, thinking, well, we've got this big plan to do all this stuff. Maybe we ought to sort of do it now, because companies like Shell have got brilliant systems for carbon capture, and they've been demonstrating it. But if they don't do it on everything, then, well, I won't say that it's not worth bothering, but basically they've got to do it on everything to sort of make a difference. And this is what companies are starting to do, isn't it? This is what this ESG is all about.
Yeah, so so what you might find is that Shell's ESG rating, or whatever you want to look at, might find, because of this news story that found out all this information, you might find it suddenly take a dip, and lots of investment firms pull their money out because they don't want to be a part of something that's not working. And suddenly that means Shell has to then make it work, because otherwise their investors will pull out, which is bad for business. So it's not necessarily the threat of being having money, no money put in only if you're green. It's by, if you do a bad thing, you suddenly get all your money taken away.
And you don't have to be totally green. From what these investment companies seem to be doing, if you are making an effort, if you are undergoing changes, and they can see that changes are being made, and you're going from, if you like, in the red towards the neutral into the green, then, and that's what you need your investment for, people are willing to do that.
Yeah.
And they're willing to invest in trying to make companies more green.
Yeah, it's their understanding that it takes time, it takes investment, but it's also, if you have a plan, a goal, a series of steps that you're trying to get there, then they can sort of lead that way. Let's take Shell back then. They plan to do this carbon capture. That sounds great. That's fabulous. That's a good step forward. It was just the fact that they weren't doing all of it, which means that suddenly they go, well, the plan is, if you don't come up with a concrete plan to say to do all of it, then there's no point us doing in this. And so that's one of the things that was majorly found within this was, the idea that just because you're doing things or not doing things doesn't mean it's not good. But it's also the idea of that policy wise, if you're trying to make an effort and try, things like, printer cartridges, if you're trying to find better inks and cleaner inks, if that makes sense.
And recycling the stuff.
Recycling, so actually having policies that state, all our offices do recycle. Now, that's not to say, the material is recyclable. It's just say we attempt to do so. And doing that attempt, you might say, oh, but it's not good enough. You're only making an attempt. But how much, unfortunately, plastics are non-recyclable. But if you say you're attempting to recycle all plastics that are recyclable, you can see the sort of the marketing ploy or the sort of the facts around that drive sort of say, all right, they're attempting to do something, they're trying to do this. Unfortunately, the situation means they can't sometimes, but that doesn't mean they're trying to at all points of the throughout the company. They're trying to do this, which is actually saying, they're actually being a decent company, which then, of course, raises their ESG credit or value up, which then proves to people that they're actually doing things and attempting to do things, which then provides them with more money or more investments to say, well, why don't you try to be more recyclable, do more recycling and sort of let's pay for a program to do more recycling. You can see how this is a positive feedback loop being generated, and it's helping that, because a little, almost like a snowball, where one thing starts getting the other. You are recyclable. The investment says, oh, great, thank you for recycling. We're willing to invest. Perhaps you might want to do a program to make yourself more recyclable. And that then improves recycling, which is great for the environment. And then suddenly you're sort of saying, right, well, what other programs could we do that are environmentally friendly?
Well, we're seeing large numbers of motor manufacturers. They're what I would call a climate risk sector. They're making petrol cars, diesel cars, which are really environmentally very unfriendly, and people want to move towards electric cars. And you're now seeing virtually all the motor manufacturers with quite a lot of electric vehicles. They've got plans to stop producing petrol vehicles, moving over to hybrids, and then over to solely electric. And you can see that if they're doing that, well, they're a climate risk company, but I'm seeing that they're trying hard, then it's worth me investing in those, because I can see that if I invest in that, I'm going to make a lot of money because there are going to be a lot more electric cars in the near future.
But it's not sort of, yes, I can make more money, because they've been making money before all this. It's the fact that they're making their money that is considered good.
Green. Yeah, it's green. Yeah.
It's one of those things where it makes you feel better knowing that my money's actually, saved that hippopotamus, or it helped to, reduce some carbon emissions to make our economy,
But you see, people that are investing, financial houses that are investing, they like to have for themselves this green bit. And we covered only a couple of podcasts ago the investment company that was buying the Welsh farms
Yeah.
and planting trees and for carbon capture, and you could invest with them and feel that you're doing something for the environment rather than investing in a coal mine, which is sort of not seen to be terribly good.
Yeah, so it's just one of those things where,
As the plane goes over.
I know. Well, unfortunately, we have to live with it. But planes are going green. That's a different story in a different podcast. But the idea that sort of previously, where people weren't happy, not their ideas, but the people's views have changed. That, perhaps I can be green and make money at the same time. Maybe these two ideas of being green or making money don't have to be,
Polar. Yeah.
or
Yeah.
not aligned with each other. Maybe I could make money and be green, and then I can sort of, I can say to my, could say to the children, sort of, what did I do to save the planet or help climate change? Oh, I invested in this company which managed to reduce its CO2 emissions. It's those sort of, and they're not doing it for, say, the kudos or the press statement, sort of, oh, look at us. It's more the idea that, well, we all need to reduce our carbon CO2 emissions, and we don't do that. If the investment home doesn't do that much, they only use electricity because, money's basically.
But if you're using electricity, you can now choose to buy electricity from a provider that only buys electricity from a green source, or you can buy it from someone that doesn't. Yeah, it's going to probably cost you a little bit more money to buy your electricity from a green source. And at this age where we're seeing sort of gas prices rocket, I sometimes feel, now I'm buying my electricity from a green source. So if I'm buying mine from a green source, why is my electricity also going up? But it's the way that basically electricity companies work, that they just buy electricity from the manufacturers and they say, well, half of it's come from renewables, half of it hasn't. And the money that you're paying is going to that sort of renewable side.
Yeah, they have to balance it up, and they have to play around. It's quite complicated in relation to how they come up with these things, these magical numbers and sums. But you can see there is this trend going to electrical, renewables, and so people are investing in these things to do so that not they can reduce their gas bills. It's as I said, it's this positive loop. You can see that if they invest in more renewables come online. We're less reliant on gas. That means that technically electricity price can be reduced because it's not being made by the high cost of gas. And therefore, it's much easier. So therefore, you can see that it makes everything so much better in the long term, which is why this strategy of doing this decarbonisation is a really big thing at the minute.
It's just going to take a long time, isn't it? And some people want this to happen instantly, and it does take time to put in carbon capture systems and do that. So we've got some science-based targets for this, haven't we?
Yeah. So instead of just directly saying, let's be greener and cleaner, and they've actually said, if you as a firm say, right, we're going to cut our CO2 emissions by half, and we're going to do it by this, say, and actually say, all right, instead of just making up some numbers, let's find a way of actually reducing it. Like, let's say reducing our, you know, heating
Yeah, heating costs. Yeah,
yeah, right, and doing that by having these targets, which are, I wouldn't say measurable, but actually
they are. They
physically,
are measurable.
that
That
yeah,
is the point.
yeah, you can actually go to investors and say, we managed to do it. We managed we managed to cut emissions
Yeah.
because we increased the thing.
So we say our heating is at the moment producing X amount of CO2, and now we've changed our system, and our heating system is now producing
less.
a significant lesser amount. And in fact, if we can't get it down enough, we might be using some carbon offsets as well to try and make it sound really better. I'm still not that happy with carbon offsets,
No, well, they've got to,
but it's significantly better than not having them.
yeah, they've got to be so a way of measuring and way of helping a company define all its ambitions and targets and help the investors learn what they're doing. Basically, sort of this idea that identifying if you are doing things is by basing your goals and or ambitions on uh, I say science-led targets. It's more sort of on data that's measurable, on things that you can actually report back on. You can find that people are suddenly willing to go with you if you see it's in the right direction. We're going to be reducing our CO2 emissions, say a ton a month or something like that. And you actually, every month, you report back, we did this month, we did 1.1
Yeah.
tons, or are we in last month we only did 0.9 tons, which is very close to one, and we need to work a bit harder next month. It's doing all these goals not by arbitrary values that we're just going to reduce. It's by saying, right, it's like a New Year's resolution, really. Instead of saying I'm going to change, I'm going to do. You say we're going to do something small but measurable, and you actually can say, right, we've done a success, we did it, guys. Now let's move on to the next small slice. And after
You do lots of little small slices.
you've seen, you finally get the cake.
So this is trying to get all your little bits that go into this ESG report, isn't it?
Yes.
So they can sort of basically see how you're actually doing. It's not just using value judgments on things, but is actually using scientific targets and saying that you've actually achieved this.
Yeah.
So targets are set, you achieve the targets, and that's going to increase your ESG rating.
Yeah. And that brings in, of course, the more money. So yeah, you can see that this is suddenly a worthwhile idea and example to do. It's just you've got to be able to prove it and show it, which is all these things are coming together to allow companies to do so, which is great. And some of them are even being reported openly. And so the public can check these things. They're not hiding their numbers, instead of saying, we don't,
Yeah.
you know,
It is being open, isn't it? This is very much this ESG thing. It is being open as well,
Yeah.
open and honest. It's not doing something. It's also seen to be doing something.
yes.
And this is making the difference. Well, you've been listening to the Going Green podcast, looking at the environmental, social and corporate governance and what's going on at the moment. Maybe you can persuade the company that you work to do something to help this. And if you can do that, then you've done your part of going green. Thank you for listening to our podcast, and we hope to see you, and you can hear from us next week.
Yes.
So from then, it's goodbye from me.
And a goodbye from me.
Bye.
Bye.